Good morning, everyone. This is Ron. It is Sunday morning. We are already in the eighth day of January. It's a little after 11, so we'll get started with our session. On yesterday, we had a lot of good questions uh, that came about, and we talked about a number of things. Uh, um, and it ended yesterday with talking about the comet. Nick sent an article out about a green comet that was coming about at the end of the month, and we talked about the spiritual significance of that, and we looked at that for a minute, and that was the probably the centerpiece of our discussion. So that led us to, Nick talked about, linked it to scripture in chapter 12 of Matthew. So any questions about that, and if he wants to, or if anybody wants to kind of do a better recap, because I apologize to you, I'm terrible at doing recaps, remembering things. So if there's more to it, or is there any questions or comments about what we spoke about yesterday, please feel free.
And I can do a recap if we need
Thank
one.
you, Nick. Yeah, if you don't mind.
So towards the end of our discussion yesterday, I talked about the article that I sent out to anybody who's on that group text, but it was an article about a comet that is going to likely be visible around the beginning of February. And the comet is, they say it might have a green color. But the original significance that I maybe want to share that article was that comet was not, or it has not been seen for many, many thousands of years. And so we talked a little bit about how when ancient people, as well as us now, recognize these signs of the times as they appear, they are markers for the cyclical nature of history and the cyclical nature of the evolution of spirit. And so this marker is yet another one that indicates that we are entering another cycle. And that cycle is sort of associated with the age of Aquarius and what that means spiritually. There are different energies that we have access to because of this new cycle and the new place that our very planet and solar system is in the galaxy. And all of this has spiritual significance for us and for our destiny as a group of human beings who are trying to figure it out.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Anyone else? Any questions or comments about what Nick said? Okay. Well, I tell you what, we'll kind of pick up from there and kind of continue. Are there any questions on any other topics before we go back into this?
I actually want to ask a question. I think it's kind of related, but
okay.
It's how do we determine what is spiritually significant, and what does it mean for something to be spiritually significant? I would like to hear your thoughts about this. Anybody?
Good question. I guess my first thought when you asked the question was, what benefits man? Anymore when we talk about spiritual things, we talk about what resonates with us, or what rhythm we feel, and this sort of thing. Anymore, anything we look at is gaining understanding of what benefits man and what helps us to move into that position, help us to see who we are, and better to utilize these energies that are available to us that have been in the earth before but have been underutilized or under recognized. So that's what I see when I say spiritual. I always think of energy and enlightenment. So how do we use that to bring enlightenment to mankind?
Thank you. And let me just say, I agree completely. I think what we recognize as spiritually significant and whatever we are calling spiritually significant, it always has to do with the return to the knowledge of the unity of all things. It always has to do with enlightenment. So you could say everything is spiritually significant, but it is a relative spectrum. There is spiritual significance to the chair that you're sitting in. There is spiritual significance to the comet that we're talking about, but it has to do with its sort of relative capacity to cause us to remember. And in that case, this comet and sort of other major signs and symbols, so to speak, of this that are similar to this are relatively very spiritually significant if we are able to recognize what they are connected to within us. So I would say, absolutely, I agree. And the way we recognize when a thing has spiritual significance is if it resonates with us in a way that causes us to remember the return to knowledge, to a sense of connection to all things. Those things are, quote, more spiritually significant to us than things that appear more mundane to us.
Before we get too far down the road, Kathy had two questions that related to the comment discussion, two specific questions. Did anybody, she asked, oh, I see, Denise responded to her now. She asked about the significance to the color of the tails. There are usually two tails, and they're different from the comet itself. So she asked, is there any spiritual significance to the color of the tails since they're different from the comet? And the second question related to the spiritual significance of the two tails, which always point away from the sun.
Oh, okay, thank you. Actually, I did see that. But like I just said, there's a relative spiritual significance to everything. But the sun itself is constantly sort of pressing outwards against everything present in the solar system. So it's the solar wind that causes comets' tails to form. And so the stuff that is coming off the comet is always blowing away from the sun because it's blowing in a direction that the solar wind is traveling. And the solar wind is going in sort of all directions outwards from the sun. So it's entering the sun's influence and envelope. And the Earth is always, or the Earth is also within that sphere of influence, of course, but it is the magnetic field of the Earth that stops some of the more things that are dangerous to material physical life from getting to the surface, along with other things in the atmosphere, I believe. But in terms of spiritual significance, I don't think I know, other than the color itself, because sort of relative to what we can see when we look up in the sky, that's how I would begin to make that determination. Like, what is the spiritual significance of a thing? Because from our viewpoint, what we can see has an impact on us sort of psychologically and spiritually and subconsciously. So it would depend, I think, on the way it appeared to us, and then how it sort of caused us to shift, even in ways we might not be aware of on a subconscious level.
I wonder if the fact that one of the tails contains gas and the other debris impact the duality of the tails, number one. Well, I guess, one of the obvious thing that I can think about is that it is not one with the comet. If it were one with the comet, it would be the comet without the tails.
Morning,
True.
this is Janine. If one is dust and one is gas, it sounds like, and they're two different colors, that one would be maybe earth consciousness, and the other might be a sort of more spiritual significance.
I think that's possible. I would have to say I don't know enough, and I would be sort of reading into it my own interpretation in a way. But I think there is significance present, but it really depends on how detailed you want to get. And the more detailed you get, the more accurate you have to make sure you're being.
That's fair. Do we know what the two different colors are, or we don't have that information?
When I was reading, good morning, this is Kathy.
Morning.
One tail appeared to be blue in the sky, like a vivid blue. And it said the other tail sometimes will appear to be blush colored. And it didn't give any explanation at all, but that was just the whole time we were talking yesterday, I kept seeing the comet with the tail behind it. And that's when I started doing the research. And that's what led to those questions, because I could see everything that was discussed yesterday and it resonated deeply with me. But I also feel like the tail being, like Barbara just said, the tails being different colors, one being made of gas and one being made of particles and debris. I just felt that there was something significant to that was deeper. And I don't see it on the spiritual level yet, but I think it does definitely have spiritual connotations. And that's what I was saying. If anyone saw it any deeper, please share with me, because I just feel like there's something deeper there. I'm done.
This is Ron. I want to thank you for the questions, Kathy, and I also appreciate the answers that were given. We look at this, and I think this whole discussion is a kind of shows us or points to who we are, and as we dig for things and search for things, we don't always see it clearly, don't always see the totalness of it, and that too is appreciated. So it may come to us in February when this thing comes about and something new is written about it, or as someone is studying it from for a different cause and see the other part of it. But the answer to it is appreciated. We see what we see we need right now, I would suppose to say. And hopefully the rest of it, if from the whatever is significant that we need, will come to us.
And I agree with that, Ron, because like the example you gave yesterday of when you were studying, you didn't see something, but then when Nick opened up yesterday, he went right to where you had dropped off and said you didn't see it. So this may not be something that we will see the answer to like today, but I think in the fullness of time, we may revisit this and have more clarity. So I just put that out there for us to really at least think about it and to just open ourselves up to the possibility that it could mean even more. And eventually, I do believe it will be revealed to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we go, let's just put a couple of other things out there so that as you guys say, in the fullness of time, things will click, meaning we will recall, because it's in us, we know this already. We just have to recall what the meaning is. But it talks about the dust. The dust is frozen for eons, for thousands of years, in the structure of the comet itself. But when the comet drops kind of close to the Earth, the sun, a source like the sun, it unfreezes and it releases the dust. And if dust is frozen, it can't. And we say it's Earth consciousness, if you will, and it cannot do anything in and of itself in its frozen state. After being released, I'm wondering if parts of that is not telling the comet available at some point in time for creation of another planetary type body. I don't know, but being unfrozen gives it options, makes options available to those dust particles that heretofore could not move. Anyway.
I have a question.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
we're seeing comments and all kinds of other activities coming or either in the atmosphere because it's a sign and God, to me, the source wants us to remember. I think the only reason why we don't know what's happening now is because we've forgotten what has happened. And the Creator wants us to remember. Because there's nothing new up under the sun, right? So that's what I'm processing too. The signs are necessary, and the Creator wants us to remember. Does that make sense? What I'm saying?
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
it does. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nick.
No, that's okay. Yes, absolutely does. And I think from my perspective, that's the main spiritual significance of things like this. It is a call to remember, if you can recognize it as such.
Yeah. I think along with that, something Barbara said kind of started a thought for me. That dust, because as you said yesterday, Nick, the origin of a comet has to do with, at least this is what is believed, the forming of the galaxy, right? The forming of the universe when it first happened. So that dust, those particles, is that history. It carries the history of the universe with it. So that dust that dissipates when it gets closer to the sun, it brings the history to the here and now. It kind of collapses time, if you will, and makes it all present in a spiritual way is what I'm saying. I know scientifically I would really like to know what happens to that water and those ice particles when they melt. What does that mean to us on Earth or in the universe? But I just thought that part was interesting when she said it. That there's something there. I guess I still don't see it yet. Trying to talk it out.
Ron,
So is that, I'm sorry, go ahead, I yield.
I just wanted to add to that comets are only visible when they're close to the sun, because of the reflection. But anyway, I was looking at the origin of the word comet, and it was saying that comet means sort of long hair or streaming hair. So the ancient peoples gave it the name comet because it looked like the long streaming hair. But also traditionally for ancient peoples, it was a sign of foreboding of something disastrous about to happen. So anyway, that's traditional belief about it. But I think in terms of the spiritual belief, I think it's a I don't know. I have to think about it again. I got to get my thoughts together. But I'll come back.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think if you watch that documentary on Netflix, Ancient Apocalypse, it goes into how the ancients paid attention to the configurations of the night sky, because it meant that one day again we would likely have to face something like a comet impact, which has happened in the past. And there's theories about how one of the previous ice ages ended as a result of a comet impact. And so in sort of the more esoteric history of the Earth, the peoples who were around during the Ice Age and before recorded in various ways the time that happened as a marker. And so we would be aware of it again in the future. But it's a sort of interesting documentary that I think it has a lot of good stuff in it.
So Nick, is that why when we see these things, that's why we keep asking, what does this mean? It's like the signs and symbols that we see. Is it because we've forgotten and we're being reminded? It's saying, the source is saying, remember. Because you asked the question previously, why do we say there's a significant spiritual meaning behind what's happening? I think that is what it's saying. Okay, all right. I'm talking it out. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Can I ask to that though? Remember where Nick started with this. We're talking about circles and not circles or cycles or things happening, but they asked Jesus, what are the signs of the times? What did they mean by of the times? So what is it that man is doing in the earth now that causes these things to run in these cycles? Can you influence these cycles not to come if they're disastrous? Can you influence them by looking at them in a more life sort of way, or you know, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Can you make it more positive? So the signs of the time say is you have some influence over this. This is something that you are causing, or you have at least an effect on.
This is Richard. If I can jump in here for a second and try to sort of connect what you just said with what Evelyn has said twice now, but mildly, timidly, it's all there already. So to be reminded that, of course, what do you want to say? I don't want to use the word ignorance, but our lack of completeness in being and understanding is what's bringing, I think, these events to the fore. And the universe has done this before. What does science say now? There was no singularity. There was no one beginning. And we even know spiritually, the Mayans and others have said what? There's cycles of beginnings and existences. Why? Because there's a continuation of incompleteness or lack of fullness of connection that affords the creator the opportunity, in a positive sense, even if it's tremendously powerful in terms of energy, to recreate something, yes, to attract our attention and give us the opportunity to connect with and grow from. And it's up to us. So that's kind of what I think this is when you go back far enough, and get away from it doesn't mean it's still not a beautiful or really exciting event, but when you go back behind it, yeah, I think a lot of it's there inadvertently. It's being driven by us, but not by maybe a combination of our wish and our lack of understanding somehow. That's the sense I kind of get of it. And that's why, just piggybacking on this a little bit too much, and what Evelyn said about it's all there already anyway, that's the one little, I don't know, edge I have when we talk about putting things into the universe. I don't see it quite that way. It's there. We're pulling it from the universe. Einstein didn't invent anything. He found and connected, or saw the connections with. So I think it's the same thing. It's there. We're going to keep having reminders until that connection is as complete it can be, as complete as it can be. And maybe that won't happen ever in our lifetimes in this existence, meaning on this planet, but it will happen. You know, I guess I say a little bit too glibly, whatever, we'll wind up back in the garden someday, but completely aware this time. Anyway, that's what Mexico does to my brain. Okay, bye-bye. Wow, I shouldn't.
I guess.
Sorry, didn't mean to do that.
No, I agree with everything you said. I agree with what Evelyn said. I think, though, putting things in the macro is real. I still believe that. And I'm saying it from a spiritual perspective. All those things are out there, but you influence them by what you put in the macro. I think what we do to man, what man does to man on earth, influences the severity of what those things do, what they form into. Everything from tornadoes and hurricanes to comets and whatever else is going to be destructive. Or it may be from a falling star that has an influence on the earth in a negative way, that changes temperatures on the earth in some sort of way. But all I'm saying is, what we do on the earth influences the universe, and the universe influences us. So it's out there for us to get, but we also have an influence of the energy that we put out there as well. And that's what I mean. These things do not have to be destructive. I think when man moves to a place where he recognizes and respects and awakens into who he's supposed to be, that all of this kind of all these earth-shattering things take a pause. From the storms that we see, from the destructiveness of the extreme heat, or anything that causes harm to man on the earth, I think man has an influence on. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about putting things in the macro. I think that's very real. And I just as real as these things that we're talking about, that as Solomon said, it's all under the sun. But he did not say you don't have control or influence over it. The scripture said that you have influence over these things. It says that in the very beginning. So that's what we're talking about here. That's the getting in rhythm with and understanding who we are. That's the other part of it that I don't want us to miss.
Ron,
Yeah.
I tend to agree with you. Everything is energy, and the macro simply is aligning our energy with what's already there.
Yes.
And it can affect it, just like the sun can affect the comet by beginning to unfreeze some of its frozen parts. When we combine our energy, the positiveness of our energy with what's in the universe, the resonance becomes greater. And if that resonance is greater, that vibration is different and affects things differently than if we don't combine our energies with it. Just like a guitar or a bass guitar or whatever. It depends on how you tune the strings as to the type of vibration you get. And so part of what we do is helping to tune the strings of that universe that we are already a part of, and that is already a part of us. And that's the
we're the
oneness
only
that we're striving for.
And
But aren't
we're
you
the ones
saying-
to do it. Only ones that can do it. Yes.
But aren't we really basically saying you're, for want of a better term, you're identifying it, you're drawing it out or through you? Didn't we say years ago in Foundation, you receive truth or love in order to give? So isn't it part of that flow? It's not a putting it there. It's a bringing it, if you like, from darkness and unrightness into a light. But it was there. There's nothing small about that transformation. That's wonderful, but that's what love and everything I think is all about. You don't create love. You what? You identify, you connect, and you give it, if you like, life or / light. That's the sense I have, because the way I hear the other, there's an element of ego that we're not letting go of. And I think, and I'm talking about myself too, that's the biggest challenge. It's letting go of that last aspect of ego to complete a fullness of oneness, connection and oneness. But I mean, maybe I'm putting apples and oranges together here, or making a Rubik's Cube out of something that's simpler. I don't know. It's just,
Richard,
okay.
I think you're getting bogged down in the verbiage and the words. It's not an ego thing if your intent is the right intent. It is simply putting a sharing back with the universe, what it's given to you. When we say put it in the macro, that's not putting our ego there. It's the intent that we approach it with, the intent for righteousness, the intent for peace and love and whatever that we have received. That's all that is. So don't get bogged down with that one word, because you see it one way. Don't suggest that others have to see it that way, as long as our intent is the same.
I understand. I'm just telling you the way I see it. But I don't think in the end, we're talk about bogged down. We're already bogged down. But I'm trying to find a way to be free of that. That's all.
Here's what I'm saying, and I hope this kind of helps it, because I think we're unbogging right now. That's what we've been doing for the last few years. If you look at all these things, from the comets to the sun to all the energy, as somebody said, love and hate, all these things are out there. All these things. If you look at those as the 26 letters of the alphabet, all these things, the 26 letters are already out there. But somebody, man, is supposed to influence those letters. You can take those and write love. You can take those and write inspiration. You can take those and write passion. Or you can take those and write hatred and bigotry. But somebody is influencing them all the time. They're already there. The energy is already in the universe. But what do you do with it? It is not the ego to move it. When you recognize that you are Elohim, you are moving it in a positive direction. You are not taking it and using it as energy to destroy mankind or to promote your greed or selfishness. So when you take those letters, you are being in harmony with the universe. You are being in harmony with the Creator. You are recognizing that you're Elohim and you're doing with them what you're supposed to do. So putting it in the macro is taking those letters and forming hatred into love, and taking evil and reversing the letters and making it into live. You're changing these things. You're changing the energy of it, and you're changing it to not be so destructive. So when we talk about the comet, and Nick mentioned the history of it, how it had come to the earth and caused destruction in the ice age and all, that doesn't mean it has to happen the second time. We've said all along, not on our watch. Not on our watch. So this is spiritual. This is not ego. This is recognizing when you are Elohim, that the power and responsibility that comes with that. And it is in anything, it is a humbling thing, because you recognize that you are one with the Creator, and you see yourself, now look at this. Who am I to be able to look at this and influence this? The Creator trusts us to do this, because you have forsaken everything in your life to be on this phone, to be at this place. That's what we're talking about here. So this is not a scientific thing. This is all spiritual, and yes, it is hard to understand.
Yes, and Ron, good morning, everyone. I just want to piggyback off of what you're saying in reference to energy, and I believe that energy and spirit, is one. They say energy can never be destroyed, never created, always was, always is, moving in the form, out of form, and through form. And it's the same with the spirit. I think that there's two type of births. We have the galactic birth, when we talk about the superclusters, transitioning into clusters, transitioning to galaxies, into planets, to the stars. But it's sort of, the same way I look at it, in terms of the earthly birth, when we talk about the panspermia. And that's where, again, in terms of the birth of a child, the umbilical cord, I think is something that's all in that energy, where we look at it spiritually. And so I can, concur, with, the fact that, we are spirit, we are energy, again, moving out of form and through form. So just to look at it where we are, or where I'm at today, I think that there's, in my words, a baptism of the Holy Spirit, where we're seeing it, from I am the universe and the universe is me. But I just think that it all is stemming from, what Nick mentioned when we talk about what is the purpose of this comet. And as people have said, the more closer that the comet moves to the sun, there's gases that are being released. And so whatever is being released out in the universe is for a purpose, to hopefully bring us back into that oneness of the importance of looking at it spiritually. And so, I think it's an exciting time just to try to, search and seek these kingdom principles, or searching to seek, what we all are coming aware of. I'm done. I'm done. Thanks for letting me share that. But Elohim is everything, and everything is Elohim.
Thank you, George. My mind goes back to something Janice said, as one being physical, one being spiritual, one the gases and the physical particles. As those particles dissipate, maybe that's the part that we're not seeing, we're missing. Maybe that which is physical is becoming spiritual. As those gases get closer to the sun and they melt, and they become part of that atmosphere, they become spiritual. So maybe that is the sign to us of what we're doing. We are that comet. And as we move closer to the SON, we become more spiritual. And that is what we're witnessing now. But anyway.
Thank you, everyone. And I just want to say I agree with as we move closer to the sun, as the physical things become more spiritual, metaphorically and physically. But I want to take it back to what I talked about yesterday about Jonah. But before we do that, I want to make sure we sort of finish this part of our discussion.
Nick, before you move forward, I want to share something.
Mhm.
I've listened to the discussion this morning, and I'm listening to when we talk about putting something in the macro, and based on what Richard was saying, it made me stop and ask myself, when I say putting something in the macro, what am I really saying? What does that mean to me? And the way I see something, putting something in the macro, of course, energy already exists. We are not creating energy. But when I say I'm teaching a lesson, or I'm giving insight, or is something resonating inside of me, I see that as creating pathways for mankind to be able to draw that energy to them, to show them who they are. So it's not that I'm necessarily creating energy, because the energy already exists. But I also know that the Bible talks about how man can harden his heart, having eyes he cannot see, having ears he cannot hear. What we are doing when we put something in the macro is giving mankind the opportunity to see and hear, and to draw from what they see and hear, so that it resonates deeply on the inside of them as to who they are. So whenever I think about it, when I say I'm putting something in the macro, I see a pathway that I am opening up for mankind and humanity to draw from, so that it has the opportunity to see itself and to see who it is. And so like we said, we're not saying ego is involved and we're creating all of this energy, because energy was here before we were here. Energy is who we are, and we're all one. So it's not that we're creating, in my opinion, the energy, but we are creating the pathway and opening up opportunities for mankind to even have the desire to want to pull from that energy and to see who they are. So I just wanted to share that before you move forward. So thank you.
Hey, Kathy, can I share too something? Because you've hit on what I was thinking as well. The discussion we were just having reminded me of the one my dad and I used to have of, if the tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, does it make a sound?
Yeah.
And you could ask, well, does it matter? Well, if the tree falling caused an avalanche, it mattered, right? And to say that we see or don't see these concepts, if we were to say nothing about them, if we didn't resonate them to others, they may not see them. Like if Buddha had his revelation and never resonated, never said anything, never said, well, it happened, I observed it, I am, it is, that's all there is, we would never have shared in that. So like you're saying, we're amplifying and resonating these concepts, which can provide, that experience and that knowledge to those who maybe didn't pick up on it or hear it, because they weren't able to listen. I guess is kind of what you said and what I'm hearing too. So I think the main thing is they are the same. They're the same sides of an argument. I could be simply and not share what I am,
and that's an okay existence. Trees do that, animals do that. But if I am and I resonate what I see or hear or feel, then I am creating, without creating energy, I am creating a path, like you said, an understanding of it that might not have been brought to the forefront by simply being that. Now, maybe we'll get to the point where no one has to do that because we're all in sync and all resonating together, and no one has to bring voice to it because we all get it. I just don't think we're there yet. So,
And
sorry,
I
this is
agree.
Rainier, but
Absolutely.
that's what I feel.
I agree, Rainier. Absolutely. I see exactly what you're saying, and I agree.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree as well. It's like we're all little tuning forks, and we hear something, and we have to resonate in tune with what we hear, and that in turn allows for more people to be able to hear it. And all of those things are related. So I do want to move on to was somebody saying something?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. Just to piggyback off what Miss Cassie said, keep it as close to it as possible. If you're gonna put something, if I'm gonna put something in the macro, the Bible speaks of this. It speaks of it in Titus. Wise males teach the unwise males how to be sane. And it also gives some directions for females. I'm not familiar with it. I just know it's in Titus, in the King James Version. So if you're putting something in the macro and it's based upon knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, you got to give your knowledge and wisdom to the next person. That's putting something in the macro. I do deal with people who are stingy. And if they stingy and they ain't in my presence, I'm going to show them up every time. I'm going to embarrass them. And I can do it in a way that the best eye ain't going to be able to know it. So that ain't good. And right now, I need a wise person to show me some things. I'm impulsive. And last week, anytime I think about somebody past my nose, I think about humanity. I get in the worst trouble. And I'm wrestling with this part of, do you think about humanity or you just think about yourself, George? And I really don't want to think just about myself. But I'm finding that, sometimes you need to mind your business, George. Let them people go and do what they do. If they hit a brick wall and something kind of catastrophic happens, let them do that. Mind your business. They say if you mind your own business, you won't catch a stroke or a heart attack. So I need a wise person, male or female, no matter what the age is. Hey, if I see something and I'm going to move on it and I know it do good for humanity, do I need to just stop and breathe? So if you got game out here and you going to put it in the macro, you got to teach people how to maneuver in situations. I'm glad to say this, that the people that allow me to hang out with them, all of them 63, 64. They cooperative. I'm glad to say all of them give me game. They didn't put children through college. Now they working on grandchildren. All I got to do is hang around them. I'll learn it. So whatever you got, you know something, and you elect not to share it with someone, you a stingy person. So whatever you got, that you're gonna put in the macro, just share it with someone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And one more thing, Nick. This is Rainey again. I think when we're looking at the verbiage too, putting it in the universe is a different concept because things exist. Putting it in the macro is bringing it to a level of human consciousness so that we understand it exists. I think maybe that might help with what we're talking about, at least as I see it.
Thank you. I agree with that. Yeah. It's a translation of sorts. Okay, so I do want to continue on sort of where I began yesterday, but go into it a bit in more depth. So all of this started with me relating the concept of seeing sort of signs in the heavens, etc., with the verse from Matthew. And I can read it for you. You don't have to look it up, but it's Matthew chapter 12, verse 38 through 40, essentially. Basically, the people are asking Jesus for a sign, and he tells them, no, only an unrighteous group of people or generation craves a sign, so no sign will be given. The only sign that will be given is the sign of Jonah. Just as Jonah was sitting in the stomach of a sea monster for 3 days and 3 nights, so will the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. So instead of the sign that the people egotistically desired to receive, the only sign that will be given is the sign of Jonah. And so I related the concept of this comet being one of the signs with something that we can recognize for what it is, or sort of ignore and sort of egotistically crave a sign that we have already defined based on our own, whatever, the ways in which we are different. And the problem with that is described by the sort of story of Jonah. And that's why it's referenced in the New Testament. Because this whole story, like everything in the Bible and everything that we've been speaking about, is spiritual. And it is what happens to us, what happens to the human being when their basically ego gets in the way of their capacity to perceive what is already present. So, as I mentioned yesterday, the signs are already in the room. It's not that they do not exist. It is that when we sort of ask for something, we're usually doing that out of, well, we have to be careful not to do that out of our own sense of sort of selfish ego, because that means that we are trying to define and enforce onto reality a sign, a thing that we want, that conforms with what we believe, rather than allowing our perception and our beliefs to see what is present already. So when your ego gets in the way, the story of Jonah is what happens. So just to recap, so I want to go over a bit of the story of Jonah, and then describe what it relates to spiritually. So I know we've said many times as we've had our discussions over the years that everything that we speak about, or everything that the Bible talks about, is a component of us, is a part of us. And it describes how the human being evolves spiritually, and the aspects of our own selves that we have to recognize and learn to bring to a place of balance in order to sort of complete our purpose for being present in this physical experience. And the story of Jonah is very much a part of that process. So let me begin, and then I'll ask if there are any questions, of course. But so I'm sure we've all heard the story. In Jonah, the book of Jonah, chapter 1, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, and cry out against it because of their wickedness." But Jonah fled to another city away from the presence of the Lord, as it states. And he found a ship in the sort of city that he fled to, and got on it in order to go even further away from the presence of the Lord. Verse 4, chapter 1. However, the Lord hurled, and I'm reading from the New American Standard Bible. Verse 4, however, the Lord hurled a great wind on the sea, and there was a great storm on the sea, so that the ship was about to break up. The sailors on the boat became very afraid, and they threw everything off the boat to try to lighten the boat. But Jonah apparently was not afraid, and he went down into the ship itself and fell asleep. So the people on the ship tried to come up with a way to determine why there was such a huge storm they were going through. So they cast lots, according to the story in verse 7. Basically, it means they tried to do whatever they could in terms of divination to sort of get at the real reason the storm was happening. And when they did that, they determined it was Jonah. Jonah was the reason for the storm, and so they threw him overboard in order to stop the storm. And when they threw him overboard, the storm stopped. And then I'll stop there. But what we're seeing in this story, when we talk about, when it talks about Jonah fleeing from the presence of the Lord, is what happens within us when we sort of fail to heed the message that we are able to hear, in the sense that we spiritually feel and perceive that message as we are able to receive it. When we sort of fail to hear that message, or when we sort of cover it up with our own fear, selfishness, etc., whatever aspect of our ego, our selfish ego, that we are engaging in order to ignore that, what happens is that we are sort of thrown into this state of turmoil, because the ship and the storm and all these things related to the story of Jonah are internal processes. The ship and the storm is the nature of our sort of internal mental, emotional, spiritual state when we ignore the sign that is given to us internally. When we ignore, for whatever reason, the influence of spirit that we have the ability to listen to and to heed. So you can imagine the people on the ship as your own thoughts, your own sense of self, that instinctually knows that there is a component, a deeper component of yourself, in this case represented by Jonah, that must pay attention to the influence of spirit in order for things to be in balance. So the men on the ship who were angry at Jonah was like the sort of internal turmoil that happens on a subconscious and conscious, an instinctual level, because there is a component of your own self that knows that you must pay attention to the influence of spirit. And if you don't, it creates chaos within yourself and externally. And so it's like you're fighting yourself. But if you're not consciously aware what is going on, then you don't necessarily know why this sort of internal chaos exists. So the men threw him overboard. They pushed that sense, that internal desire and need to respond to the influence of spirit. They pushed it deep down and away from the conscious mind. So the storm, representing that sort of internal turmoil, became calm, but not necessarily for a good reason, but because they were able to distance themselves from that internal sense of the need to respond to listen to the influence of spirit. So they, in a sense, cut off their connection. Not really, but they did what they could to ignore it to the fullest extent. And at least on a surface level, it became calm. So of course, after that, we know Jonah is swallowed by the fish after he's thrown overboard. And the fish representing a sort of deep internal place, one that is surrounded by, I think it depends, but one that is generally surrounded by something like anxiety, something like those aspects of self that cause internal chaos that we don't necessarily know how to deal with, yet are sort of deeply present within us, that are themselves hiding or covering and preventing us from being able to interface with the message, the influence of spirit. So the sign of Jonah mentioned in Matthew, which is referring back to the story, is that when your ego is attempting to determine or predetermine what it is you think you should see or what it is you think you need, then the only sign that is given is that internal turmoil that is produced because the ego has in some way rejected the capacity to hear and receive from and feel the influence of spirit. And that's what Jonah represented in that case. And that is internally how we can sort of be aware of what it is we are doing and whether or not what it is we are doing is along the correct path, in a sense. If we have the ability to listen, or rather be aware of our own internal environment, we can be aware of where our decision-making comes from. Is it from the influence of spirit based on our capacity to receive from it and to hear it, or is it from our sort of egotistical, sort of self-determined sense of what we need, what we want, and what we should do? Because one of those things creates sort of internal chaos represented by the storm. And the other is what allows for balance and clear insight, as represented by Jonah. But being in the belly of the fish, that capacity for clear insight, that capacity to hear and perceive and feel directly the influence of spirit has to be pulled out of that deep place. So in this story, we are Jonah, we are the people on the boat, and we are the fish. It is all aspects of self that must be uncovered, that must be recognized when they create certain internal conditions. And the metaphor of the storm is a more obvious one. So that was a lot. Let me stop there and give you, anyone, a chance to respond to what was said so far. Does that make sense? What do you think? And I can go over.
Sorry, I was trying to get to my my screen.
And I'll go over the specific parts of the story. We can do that in more detail, but that was a sort of general overview. Go
Well,
ahead.
the thing that Nick, hello?
Yep, go ahead.
Oh, the thing that struck me was the fact that you addressed all of these things, which if we look at physically with the eye, we would see as separate things. But the fact that you tied it all together and said, okay, all of these things are aspects of yourself. You know, the different thoughts that we have are an example of different thoughts that we have of the community of the internal community that we have. Each may be saying different things, but we have to be the one to unify and balance those within us. So that's what struck me, that it was a reminder of that to me. But it also said that to me, that we can determine to some extent what happens to us by our balancing. By balancing me, I can also affect my environment. Thanks.
Thank you.
This is Charlie. I believe, what you said and what Barbara said, because I understand now more hardly the names just in the book. But if you change everyone's names in this book and put our names there, and then you get to thinking about it real hard enough, you'll see yourself. I ain't talking about just see yourself like look in the mirror. You see yourself as being those characters. And just like when we were talking about something before, we had said, you remember when the man asked Jesus about, talk to us about spiritual things. And Jesus said, how can I talk to you about spiritual things? You don't understand the earthly things? Now I understand that a little bit. Our Savior, well, not our Savior, Christ is teaching us now to understand this spiritual thing that's happening, that's going on. The Creator, I say it like that. And the more and more we deep and deeper more into this, you'll start seeing a lot of things. It's gonna make you say, I saw this before. I understand it now. It's making you really look at yourself. I'm done.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Wholeheartedly agree. So I mentioned this a little bit yesterday, but in Matthew, when Jesus mentions the story of Jonah, he says that Jonah was in the stomach of the sea monster for 3 days and 3 nights. so will the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. And we talked a little bit about what that meant yesterday. But what that is saying is that those things will be hidden for until it is a sort of completeness has been achieved. And what that means is they will be hidden for as long as they need to be hidden by the ego. So let me explain that a little bit. We enjoy being sort of selfish, and it's not that necessarily we're very negative about it. We just like doing what we do because that's all we know. But there is a time sort of in our own development and spiritual evolution that we begin to recognize that what we know might not necessarily be all there is to know about who we are, about what our purpose is, about our life, existence, etc. And it is at that point that our sort of egos, our sort of more self-centered sense of self, makes a complete cycle. We're finished with the time that we needed to just do our own thing, so to speak. And it is at that point that we begin to recognize the need to pursue something deeper within self. We begin to recognize the need to draw out that thing, that aspect of self that we had hidden previously, or that we simply didn't know about because we were just doing whatever we wanted to do otherwise. And it's at that point that Jonah, in this story, exits the fish. It is at that point that, as it says in Matthew, the Son of Man leaves its sort of hidden place in the earth. That is the kind of emergence of, or re-emergence of the need and the desire to connect internally to our own sense of spirit, to our own capacity to be aware of the messages and the feelings that are passed to us via our connection, via our, in reality, true self that is always present and always sort of there to be interfaced with. So the number 3 represents sort of completeness, just like the more familiar story is Jesus being in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights. But it has to do with the, as I mentioned, completeness of a cycle, the sort of full experience of a thing, such that there's no longer a need to experience that thing, and we desire to return from that experience to another. So in Matthew, and this is verse 38 through 40 that I'm pulling from, Jesus says to the sort of people who are asking egotistically for a sign, one that they understand, one that they want, one that they sort of are in control of. He says, no, an evil and adulterous generation craves a sign. And he's speaking directly to the sort of selfish nature of our own desire to impose onto spiritual reality something that our ego wants, something that our ego wants to see, something that our sort of selfish ego desires to have happen, as opposed to reality, as opposed to the spiritual truth of the thing that is already present being known to us. So an evil, quote unquote, an adulterous generation refers to our own sense of being off the path, our own desire to attach ourselves to sort of whatever egotistical thing. And we definitely mentioned in some of our conversations in the past, adulterous does not literally mean sleeping with somebody else's spouse or whatever situation. Although that is certainly probably a product of a selfish ego. But adulterous in the spiritual sense means that you are attempting to attach yourself or interface with something other than spirit, something other than the true nature of the self and the creator. You are attempting to attach or interface with something of your own egotistical desire. That's what it means. So the only sign, as we've just gone through that story, that is given to an egotistical desire to receive a sign is the sign of internal turmoil. And when you pay attention to your own self, you can recognize that in the case when you have sort of thrown yourself off the path, you can come back to it. The nature of the experience that is created by any choice or any action will give you a clue as to the source of your decision to make that choice that put you in that particular experience. So let me say that again. The nature of the experience that you encounter gives you a clue as to the nature of the choice that put you into that experience in the first place. If it's a more selfish choice, it will produce an out of balance, sort of more storm-like, as in the case of the story of Jonah, a more storm-like experience. An unselfish choice will produce a more balanced, more calm internal environment. And it may not be so obvious, but it is something we have to be sort of aware of continuously as we sort of pay attention to what's going on within our own selves.
Nick, say that one more time. The nature of the experience you encounter gives you a clue.
Yes, the nature of the
outcome.
Right. The nature of the experience gives you a clue as to the nature of the decision that got you into that experience. Was that decision, was that sort of internal source an egotistical one, or was it, or I should say, was it a selfish decision? Was it a selfish sort of direction you moved in? Or was it an unselfish? Was it one that was seeking something unselfishly? Was it one that was seeking a greater connection to your own spirit and capacity to be aware of the messages that we constantly receive? That kind of thing. Now, that doesn't mean that if you have an internal sort of, we all deal with this, various fear, anxiety, etc. That doesn't mean if you experience that, then it's the result of something you did selfishly. No, that's not what this means. It just means to pay attention to what you're doing so you don't get yourself into a worse situation in this case. Because that's what Jonah did. He heard the sort of influence of spirit. He heard the Lord calling out to him, and then he ran away. Don't do that. We shouldn't do that. So what does it mean to hear? How does one hear the word of the Lord, as in the case of Jonah, where it says, the word of the Lord came to Jonah? How did he even recognize it in order to deny it? That is something that comes with practice in our own experience. It is the purpose of meditation to sort of calm the storm that is on the more surface parts of ourself, so that we can investigate the deeper parts and see what is there and draw out those aspects of self that are connected to our spiritual awareness and true self, our true spiritual self, as opposed to the more temporary physical self that we experience on a mundane day-to-day level. As in the story of Jonah, the word of the Lord that comes to you is at first experienced as a feeling. It is a subtle internal movement or vibration that you can recognize when you make yourself aware of it, and when you sort of create an internal environment that can become aware of it. It is not so difficult as we might think it is. It is natural and instinctive to us, the desire to and the ability to hear the word of the Lord as it is described. That is our natural state. That is our instinctual desire. It is to first listen to spirit, and then everything that sort of extends from that is comes afterwards. But the first thing we have to do in order to get back to that place where we have the ability to clearly hear, is exactly what is being spoken about when we hear that common phrase, if a man have ears, let him hear. When you internally hear, when you perceive, when you feel the influence of spirit, then you can act in accordance with that. But in order to hear it, you have to clear out all the sort of junk. You have to calm the storm. So, any other questions at this point before I keep going?
This is Ron, Nick. I thank you. You've done a great job of explaining this and making it clear. The thing that jumps out to me is, one of the things anyway, is it sounds like a refuge, right? It sounds like even though you run from this hearing, this internal feeling, there is a place that you can go. And he was overtaken this, or so it seemed, but there is a place that you can go internally to quiet your storms. And if you put this in, he's talking to the scribes and the Pharisees. This is a clear message that what you are desiring, you're talking about a sign of the time, this is already in you. You have available to you the thing that you asked for. And again, you talked about the completeness of three. He mentioned day and night. So in those things that are clearly seen and understood, and those things that are complete darkness, those things that are foreign to you, the things that you have no sight of right now, are all available to you if you desire them. That's kind of what I'm seeing and what you're saying. So,
What I'm
no,
seeing.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Ron.
go ahead. Go ahead. I'm pulling all this together in the circle. I read this whole chapter, and the part of it I could see, and part of and Nick's explanation kind of ties it all together to me, and I'm seeing it. So go ahead, I'm listening.
I was just going to add to what you said is that there is no place that you can run far enough, run away from yourself, meaning the divineness that you are. There is no place that's far enough that you can hide away. And the other thing is that what the question I had is, what if in the story Jonah wasn't swallowed in the fish? I mean, from the physical, what would have happened? If Jonah wasn't swallowed by the fish, he would not have been isolated and afforded the opportunity to begin that meditative process. The distractions would have continued for the entity called Jonah, and it would have taken even longer, perhaps, to reconnect with the spiritual voice that was within him. So sometimes when we, quote unquote, go through things, not all the time, as Nick said, but sometimes it's by our own design, and it puts us there. We have to go through it so that we learn to pay attention again to that which is our spiritual makeup. So any way you look, however you cut it, however you slice it, we can't run from the divinity that we are.
There is to me anyway, if you see what I'm saying, there's an unwritten part of this as well. If he does not recognize this is his storm, is he overtaken by the fish? So we recognize the noise, we recognize those storms and those agitations and those things, and we seek refuge. And that is a part of this as well. How many times do we ignore the noise, or we know we're not in the right place, and we don't seek refuge, or we don't try to reach a place of understanding, and we're overtaken, we're overwhelmed by the storm, and that's just kind of stands out to me as because he's talking to leadership here, and he recognizes that where they are in their thinking, and that kind of speaks to me as to where we are, individually and collectively. So yeah, I just agree with that. I agree with you wholeheartedly. This is just I've never seen this like this before, and it's a lot in here. Thank you.
Thank you. And I definitely agree with George and Barbara. You cannot run from yourself in this entire story. Like all stories that are part of the Bible are about you.
It's Charles again. What happened to someone when they going through that right there, and they get overwhelmed in their mind on the way they're thinking, they get all confused and take themselves out? And you know what I mean by taking themselves out? Or suicide, I see it like that. What happens then?
Yeah. Well, essentially what happens when we every single one of us eventually leaves this physical experience is that we in some way become immersed in the nature of the mind that we have cultivated for ourselves. So when someone kills themselves, it's generally difficult to extract them from their own tangled web of whatever it was they were dealing with. Let me say this, the closest thing to hell that actually exists spiritually in any realm of reality is internal turmoil that we create for ourselves, that we encounter, etc., that we don't know how to escape from. That's it. There's no place of punishment that anyone is sent to. No one is sent anywhere. It is the nature of the self that you encounter. And if you have not had a chance to learn how to balance and heal the self while you are sort of in this physical material experience, you encounter in some ways the nature of that self that you were to some extent not fully yet aware of. All its negativity, all its positivity, or all, I should say all our negativity, or all our positivity. But that is not the end. There is even a process of healing whatever it is that occurs after we leave this physical experience as well. The reason we're here in this physical experience is because that process can occur faster, because we can be more aware of what it is we need to focus on. It is more difficult to do that when you are sort of diving headfirst into a new cosmic environment that we're not yet we don't know how to swim in it yet. That said, as I just mentioned, there is still a process of healing that occurs after we leave the body. It just may take longer. But that's not the end. Regardless of how you leave this experience, and at some point you will have clarity, and at some point you will be able to reflect on the nature of the experiences that you had while present in this material, physical experience. And then there are more decisions to make and more things to learn. But I hope that answers your question.
It did. Thank you.
I like your answer, Nick, because we have been taught over the years, and it's still hard to swallow the pain we feel when we hear about someone who has taken their own life. Part of that pain is it feels final. You know, we've been taught that this is final. There is no healing for them, and I'm glad you added that part onto it. We're knowing now that all the things that we've been taught, we can question them and find out what the truths are in them. And my argument has always been too, is it not suicide, the evil in the earth, and treat man a certain way that know that is wrong and commit murderous acts, and both literally and spiritually, and you leave this earth? Is that not also a form of self-destruction? So there has to be a healing there. There has to be something more that can be enlightening to it, and part of that may be Pastor talked about this at one time, but the Revelation talks about the tree of life, the leaves are to be, for healing, and what that means. So I don't believe that death is just a damnation on everybody in this, leaving this earth like that. So yeah, I just appreciate your explanation of that.
Thank you. And I don't know if we've ever sort of dealt with that sort of religious Christian concept of hell in here and
Yeah.
as formal a way, but no such fate exists. Now, that is not to say that there are not negative experiences to encounter. Of course, there are. We've all had them. And there are negative experiences that could be had in other realms of reality as well. But there's no thing punishing you. There's no one, as I've read in one of my books, I forget which one, no one is punished for anything. But many people are punished by what they have done. So no one is punished for anything. If there is any sense of something that feels like punishment, it is you are being punished by the thing, because you recognize that that thing is greatly out of line with the true nature of spirit, with true nature of reality. And you essentially have regret, and you essentially punish yourself because you can see what it is that you did. And there's a lot to that reveals about the nature of what this experience all is. And I know I've spoken about in here before, that is also a sort of the secret, quote unquote, behind how the karma works. If you've heard of the concept of karma, this is very much a real spiritual thing. But it is that whatever you do to someone else, you have done to yourself. Because in reality, in the ultimate spiritual nature of this experience, we are all connected and all one and the same. So you can't do something to someone else that has not been done to yourself. We're just unaware of that connection for the most part while we are participating in physical material experience.
Nick,
Yes, sir.
when you say that suicide is actually an escape from hell, and if that is true, and I do believe it is, then Revelation speaks of hell and death, whatever death is, being cast into the lake of fire. That doesn't mean what we've been taught it means. The lake of fire is a place of rejuvenation, a place of repose. So the entanglements that would stifle someone to the extent that they die by suicide, die by their own hands, because they want to escape the hell that they're living in. This will be no more at the place where we find balance. And this thing of death, this separation from the essence of who we are spiritually, will be purified as well, which means that those are things we really don't have to deal with anymore, cope with, unless we make a choice to do so. The way out will be much clearer than it has ever been at that point. Thank you. I think that's right. Is that what you're saying?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. It says that kingdom of heaven is within you. So also is anything that could be called a hellish experience. And the resolution to that is also within you.
6.
Now, if some of you are asking, wait a minute, okay, if no one is punished, are we rewarded? If the kingdom of heaven is within you, how can we get sent to heaven? Correct. No one is sent to heaven. No one is sent to hell, quote unquote. Reality, the spiritual nature of reality, is what it is. And we, based on our perception, based on our spiritual development, gravitate towards certain experiences. Now, that's a little bit, I think, well, let me say, hell does not exist, but heaven does. And that exists simultaneously with the idea that we do not get sent anywhere. And I think we can have a more full discussion about these concepts at another time, but I will leave it there for now.
If I may make a suggestion, guys, this is a good place to pause it. You think so, Nick? Is there anything else you wanna add before we pause it for the day, or would you want to pick up here tomorrow?
I will not be able to be here tomorrow. I will be able to be here on the weekends, though.
Okay. This is good. Very enlightening. Well, then on that note, is there something else you wanted to add before we pause it for the day? You want to do a recap maybe, and we'll call it a day and pick it up later.
Sure.
Nick,
Oh, go ahead.
because you'll be available next weekend,
Yes.
unless the questions carry us in a different direction. Can we explore the concepts of heaven and hell in more detail
Yes. I think that's a good idea.
next weekend?
Mhm.
Okay.
I have a question, Pastor. Pastor, you gonna be on the call tomorrow?
I don't know yet. What do you
Okay.
need?
Well, if you're on the call tomorrow, I would like you to explain this significance of this voting of the House Speaker.
Oh, sure. I will. If I'm on, I will. That's
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
yeah. Only if you're on. Yeah. I want you to be the one.
yeah. Won't take 5 minutes. Okay.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
So just to recap, I mentioned yesterday the comet as a sign of the times. I spoke about the sort of mention of the sign of the times as mentioned in Matthew, related to the desire of an egotistical sort of generation to receive a sign that they had predetermined that they were sort of egotistically in control of, and related that to the story of Jonah, because as it mentioned in Matthew, if you ask out of a selfish ego for a sign, quote unquote, whatever that is, whatever it means to you when you're asking, then the only sign that will be given is the sign of Jonah, which is the nature of the negative internal experience that is produced as a result of the ego attempting to control what is already there. Jonah stays in the belly of the fish for a time until the ego releases itself, and we are able to recognize the need to pay attention to our internal connection to spirit. And that is what allows us to correctly and unselfishly perceive signs that are already present, as opposed to trying to make one that conforms to our own egotistical desire. that is when we perceive accurately. And that is when we recognize the connection to our own spirit that charts the path forward in terms of our own spiritual development. And that is, I think, a brief recap of what we've spoken about yesterday and today. And again, I will be able to be back next weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Ron,
Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I was asked to remind us who are on the West Hope call that is today at 3 o'clock.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Very enlightening day. I appreciate everybody's questions and comments and explanation of this lesson is very enlightening. Enjoyed this. So if there aren't any other questions or comments, look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Hope everyone enjoys the rest of the day, okay? Have a good day and thanks you again.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm
You too,
sorry.
Ron. Thank you. Everybody have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you,
Okay.
everybody.